Hi, I'm Eddie Burke. I've been the bartender at the Hollywood Improv for 40 years, and this is my podcast, Eddie's Bar at the Improv. Hey guys, it's Eddie Burke. Welcome to Eddie's Bar at the Improv podcast. I have got a special guest today, Mr. Frazier Smith.
Eddie, what's happening?
Hey, I'm very happy to have you. I am very anxious to hear all about you. You're originally from Detroit?
From Detroit originally, yeah.
And how old were you when you came out here?
I was 23.
Oh, so you're already grown.
Yeah.
Did you kind of start in, were you already a DJ at that point?
Well, yeah, I had been a DJ for a while then because I started in college. I went to Western Michigan University and the Mighty Broncos, Eddie. And we only had one winning season in our entire history. But
that's more than some.
More than some. And I started there. I was on the college radio station. And then I moved over to, I got a job at a local radio station, like a top 40 station in town. That was my first professional job. And it was called WYYY, which is what they asked themselves after they hired me. Like, why did we hire that guy?
WYYY.
Yeah.
Why Frazier Smith?
They regretted that immediately.
When did you start stand-up, or did you always do stand-up with that?
Well, I started doing stand-up in Detroit, in the Detroit area with a buddy. We had like a two-man show because we were two DJs. He was on the same station that I was on. So we would go out to personal appearances and try to do a little stand-up on the personal appearances for the radio station. And his name was Daddy Wags, Dick Wagenboard. And we had like a two-man thing. And those things never really work out for too long because of, they're financially not, feasible really.
Mm-hmm.
But we had fun, and then I kind of kept with it, and he kind of went off and did other stuff. But I stuck with it, tried to do the stand-up solo.
You'll enjoy the fact that my questions are going to be all over the place.
So am I, Eddie. Don't worry.
When you were a kid, is DJing or stand up, is that something like you were looking forward to? This is like, I've got to be
Well, I was a fan of back in that era. In fact, I looked up one of the old Detroit DJs recently to see what had happened to him because I was always a fan of those personality DJs, and we had some real good ones in Detroit. And it was something that you could kind of see yourself doing in the future because it was fun. Personality radio was big back then,
mm-hmm.
and that kind of it filtered out a little bit. Now it's there's some personalities, Howard Stern and some pretty big
Right.
personalities, but it also kind of is more of kind of a cookie cutter type of presentation now in some ways. But back then, almost every DJ was kind of a character.
Right. Oh,
and,
yeah.
And you'd go out to see them. You'd see they'd be at a mall signing autographs
mm-hmm.
or giving out stuff, and so it's kind of a personality-driven thing, and that kind of was enticing.
Well, I come from New York, and we had a lot
Sure,
of that.
you had a lot of great ones back
they were
there,
all like personalities.
And I met a lot of those guys. I met a lot of those good guys.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, one in particular that, and I won't recall his name. He had this Sunday show. Chairman of the board about Frank Sinatra and stuff.
Oh, sure, that guy, and then I met Cousin Brucey and all those guys, and
Cousin Bruce Morrow.
Yeah,
definitely.
Those were the days, and I think it looked like fun to be a DJ.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as stand up, I don't know. I was just kind of a fan of comedy. My dad was a big Jackie Gleason fan, and he would watch Gleason, and he would watch Steve Allen,
mm-hmm.
Both of whom I got to meet.
Oh, good for you. That's great. That had to be a real thrill.
That was a thrill for me. And so those kind of guys were the guys who I go, wow, yeah, I'd kind of like to do something like that.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any kind of training in stand-up, acting, improv stuff, whatever?
Not really. The radio, I just started so young in the radio. I think I was 17 when I started professionally. So I had a lot of training in that just by being on the air.
Mm-hmm.
As far as stand-up, I guess, I started pretty early with that, too, doing those personal appearance things.
Right.
And and acting was something I always wanted to do and was in plays a lot in college.
What was your first role as an actor?
I can't remember the name of the play, but it was well received. The play was well received, and it was, can't remember the name of it, but I had a pretty big part in that, and that kind of turned me on to the acting thing.
How about TV or film?
Well, I really didn't do film or television until I got to Los Angeles.
Okay.
Although I took a TV class in college with Tim Allen. Tim was in my class.
That's
cool. One of us made it big on TV.
When he was out of prison?
Before he went to jail. He, in fact, blames me for him going to jail, which I would like to use this podcast as an opportunity to say I had nothing to do with that. I had nothing to do with that, Eddie.
Everybody remember that, okay?
But I do
Frazier?
love Tim Allen. He's a great guy, and I work with him quite a bit now, opening up for him.
Oh, great. Yeah,
with
that's
his stand-up.
Good. 2 Detroit guys. I love that. Who were your idols growing up as far as stand-up goes, or even?
Well, I always loved Johnny Carson, my all-time favorite, and of course Richard Pryor, and I had all the albums. I would listen to the Pryor albums over and over again, and Lenny Bruce. I was a big Lenny Bruce fan. I had all the Lenny Bruce albums, Carlin, of course, all the traditional guys, and I think of the more contemporary comics. I was a big fan of. Leno. I just think Leno doesn't get enough credit for being an amazing stand-up comic.
No, he doesn't. He's
a really good comic. A big fan of Seinfeld. Seinfeld's a terrific comedian. Mm-hmm. I always like Bill Maher.
Yeah,
because Bill Maher, because I do the one-liner stuff, and Bill Maher's such a clever writer. And I used to see him on TV and think, wow, that guy's pretty darn good.
He's not bad.
I like Robert Klein. A lot of those guys from that era.
As a DJ, who influenced you the most? Let me try that again. Who influenced you the most?
Well, I think it would be you, Eddie, with that delivery.
Yeah.
Who influenced?
Right.
Well, there was a guy
named for Frazier.
Yeah, there was a guy named Stephen Kleen. He was on KMET years ago here in California. He was fantastic. Steve Dahl was a Chicago DJ who did kind of a personality, crazy FM show. I loved Howard Stern. He's, of course, probably the best at this. And I like the Firesign Theater guys, too. I got to know them. They did my show when I was back in Michigan, and I was a big fan of those guys, too.
That's an improv group.
Yeah, an improv radio group that I took a lot of inspiration from.
Right, the guys that are DJs like you early on, like Bruce Morrow, Cousin Brucey, or whatever. Do you picture yourself as following in somebody's footsteps in terms of being like, or are you Frazier Smith unto yourself?
Well, I think you borrow a little bit from all those guys, and I got to know a lot of those guys. I was lucky when I was working at KLSX in town here at the Classic Rock Station. In the same building, we also owned KRLA, and that was Wolfman Jack and the Real Don Steele and Huggy Boy and Charlie Tuna. All the big AM DJs were there at that station, so I got to know all those guys, and I was glad to see Real Don Steele get in the new Tarantino movie. They KHJ is kind of the music backdrop. They're listening everywhere they go in the movie to the Real Don Steele, and I got to know him. He was legendary. I got to know Wolfman, who I idolized, and I like the way
Wolfman Jack,
the Wolfman, yeah, come on, Eddie, yeah, baby, the Wolfman. So
bring it on.
And I remember I went to a Christmas party, and there he was, and he came up to me, and he was excited to meet me. He goes, "The party animal, yeah, man." We were partying together that night. He's legendary. I think that's kind of a career arc I could see, because he also segued over to TV. He had Midnight Special, as you know, and so that was. But the guy that I think everybody tries to be like, and that I most would want to be like, would be Johnny Carson.
Oh God, and that's a level.
It's hard to get up to that level.
Yeah, but even so, it's something to shoot for.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a DJ, I assume you've interviewed a lot of rock groups and stuff on your shows or music personalities.
Yeah.
Who were you most excited, or one of the groups were you really like, wow, I've got so-and-so today?
Well, I've had most of the big groups on, but the guy I always liked the best was Alice Cooper.
Okay.
Because Alice Cooper...
What, a snake?
Well, yeah, I had the same. He was very funny. He's a witty guy. He could have been a stand-up comedian. He could have been a talk show host, anything, really. Very talented guy. Also a Detroit guy. But I just thought he was, and Johnny Carson said he was the best interview of all the rock stars.
Really?
That he had on, yeah.
Well, do you find like a lot of the rock stars, or even, well, not so much comedians because they're comedians, but they have these outgoing personalities because they're up front there and
I
they're
love them.
easy
I
to
love
talk
them all.
to.
They're fun. They did a similar career thing. They wanted to do entertainment, and that's what they went into. And a lot of them are very witty. A lot of them could have been comedians. I do like almost all the rock musicians.
Where was the very first place, let's say in LA, that you did stand up?
Well, I think the first place was probably the old Laugh Factory, the Laugh Factory before the Laugh Factory that's there now. Because Jamie Masada was my friend, and he was on my side. He was my sidekick on my radio show. He was Buddy
no
Buddy
kidding.
on my radio show.
Never
Buddy
knew
Frazier,
that.
I must tell you, let's make it happen, buddy. We get it going. I am between a rock and a fireplace, buddy. That was Jamie.
No idea.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Jamie.
I never
and
knew that,
so
yeah.
one day he says to me, Frazier, buddy, I am going to open a club. Well, of course I didn't believe him, because it's Jamie. But he did open a club, and it was a tiny little. It was about a third of the size of what the club is now. So
Right, because it was Greenblatt's Deli.
Yeah, it was Greenblatt's Deli. It was
Yeah.
the original. You're
Mhm.
right. It was the original Greenblatt's
Right.
location. And Jamie had somehow gotten a hold of it. I don't know. But anyway, I started doing stand-up there. And then I also started at Ice House, too, because Bob Fisher, the owner at Ice House, was a fan of my radio show. And Bob said, well, Frazier, why don't you come out here and host some shows? Because... you can play. It was a way for me to plug him on the radio. Yeah, I'm going to be out at the Ice House.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of smart on his part, and I would go out there. Great club as well. I think the oldest club in the country. And then
Is
I would.
it really the Ice House?
I think it is.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
and then I would play Jamie's club, and it was just, like I say, a tiny little room at that point.
When did you first start here at the Improv?
I first started here probably, I would say around 1980, probably
Okay.
80. Bud was really, I just love Budd Friedman. I got to talk about Bud. The guy is awesome. He's just a very special guy. And all these club owners have been great to me. I mean, Jamie Masada and Mitzi was great to me, and so was Bob Fisher at Ice House. They were all great to me. But Bud, very special guy, because I really wasn't at the caliber level to play this place. All the big stars were playing here then,
Yeah.
And that was Seinfeld and Leno and all the guys, and it was like I was so far below where they were at,
you just
talent-wise.
weren't experienced enough yet.
Well, yeah, I guess that would be it. But Bud was nice enough to let me play here, and then he really took care of me over the years. I have to just say, he's a great man.
Oh,
he's a great man. He, when there was a period where I couldn't get a radio gig for a while there. Thankfully, I'm back on KLOS Sunday nights, guys. Check it out.
10 to 2?
11 to 3.
11 to 2.
Come on, Eddie.
11 to 3.
Prime
oh.
time, buddy.
Yeah,
But
11 to 3, 11 a.m.,
Yeah.
11 p.m.
It's
to
11 p.m.
whatever.
But I'm
Frazier
glad to be
Smith.
on there. It's 95.5 KLOS. I'm back at my home base. But, Bud, when I could, he just took care of me. He put me in all of his clubs. I
great.
worked the Harrah's Improv a lot, which was a great room. And I worked all of his rooms. I worked the Tahoe Improv and the Fantasy Springs Improv.
Did
and
you get to do evening at the Improv?
I never got to do evening at
Okay.
the Improv. I never did. That was a show. I loved that show. And a lot of my
Yeah.
buddies did it, my friends, but I never got to do that. But,
Well, their loss.
well, you know what? I don't know. This club was just, historical. And I I like all the improvs, but particular the Melrose Club is special.
Well, this is the mothership.
It is
You
a
know,
mothership.
I agree with you. If the one in New York is the one that originated it all.
Yes,
But
yes.
this now is the mothership.
Well, and has been for some time, and so many stars have come out of here, and so many stars are on Evening at the Improv. I love to go back and watch. For the other day, I was watching on YouTube George Lopez, who's a good
Oh.
friend of mine, and I kind of helped George a little bit in the early part of his career by having him on my radio show. I had, a lot of those guys on as they were sort of coming up. And got to be friends with them, and George is an old friend. But I looked at some of his clips here. He was just so great on Evening at the Improv. There's some really good stuff on YouTube.
Their Evening at the Improv is you talk about historical. There's, like you said, every comedian at that time was doing that show. And on top of it, if you go back and look at them, how young everybody was.
Yeah, they all look young.
I know. You go
George
like-
looks really young in those clips. But, some of the material's still great. I looked at his set the other night. I was like, what? He was just... you could do it today, the same set,
Yeah.
and have a great response.
When you first got on this stage, did you feel any kind of like, wow?
I was a little intimidated by this place because
yeah.
that's a tough room.
Right.
It's never been an easy room, I don't think, but it was particularly tough in those days because you had so many top stars that were playing. Not that you don't now. You have a lot of top stars. They all play here now. But back then, I was so green and new that it was like, wow, I got to do that same stage that,
Right. Well, it was a different time. I think you had a more condensed field of comedians. I mean, maybe you had 250 in the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so, yeah, it was intimidating. And I remember not doing well here for the longest time.
I don't believe that.
No, but then, you catch on to the room and you figure it out. But I just remember here always being a little nervous when I would come here.
I've watched some of your clips, some of your one-liner clips, which are just hilarious. What makes you want to do that as opposed to storylines?
Well, I think everybody has their own style, right? And I think because of radio, my style was based around topical jokes. Because on the morning show that I had for so many years here in Los Angeles, I had to write. There's my ride, Eddie. I had to write. Oldest joke
pass you
ever.
by.
Right, yeah. I had to write a lot of one-liner jokes because that's morning radio.
Okay.
You kind of have to have stuff out of the paper that day. So I started writing jokes like that, And then I was also a huge fan, I forgot to mention him, I can't believe it, of Rodney Dangerfield.
Oh, God.
Rodney
yeah.
was my all-time favorite, him and Carson. And, I got to know Rodney. I got to work with Rodney.
Rodney, I knew Rodney since I was about 12 years old.
Did you really?
My father was a Catskill Mountain entertainer.
Oh, wow.
And he gave Rodney one of his first jobs when he changed his name to Rodney Dangerfield. And he was very grateful to my father. My father used to book the shows, and he was what they called a social director in a hotel.
Yeah.
And it was just like he was just the nicest, strangest person, that you could meet. And
Yeah.
when I came out here and he didn't remember me, and that's fine. And I reminded him who my father was, and he goes, "Oh yeah, God, Irving. Irving Burke is my father's name." It's like, yeah, he gave me work. He's the only one that would put me up because at the beginning he had a hell of a time.
Oh, I bet he had
anywhere.
a tough time. That was a tough era, and a legendary guy, and my favorite. And you talk about YouTube. You can see all of his old clips with
Yep.
Carson and everything. Just an amazing performer. And so, yeah, he was a favorite. And Carson. And so I thought, well, I want to do that style. And I liked, Bill Maher. He kind of did that style. And The one-liner guys, I love them. Stephen Wright, one of the very best,
God,
of course, and the great, late, great Mitch Hedberg. Those are all great one-liner guys. Leno's a great one-liner guy.
There's a lot to be said for that. At the same time, I would imagine it's pretty stressful coming, getting
Well, the hard
to
part
all this
about
stuff.
that is you have to lose a lot of your jokes.
Uh-huh.
You write a lot of jokes that don't have a long shelf life, so it's kind of a tricky style to have, because and if there's you remember Carson used to say slow news week. Well,
right.
if it is a slow news week, that does hurt your set, because you don't have real fresh stuff from that week. So yeah, it's a tricky style, but I think it's a style that I wanted to do, and that's what I'm doing.
And it works beautifully. Like I said, I watched a number of the clips, and I've even walked in and watched you host the shows and stuff. You're phenomenal.
Wow.
You're quick, and you just seem to you fit up there. Let me put it that way. It's like you're watching somebody who has earned the place to be there, and you show it in this, and not in an arrogant or egotistical way, in a comfortable way.
Well, thank you, Eddie, for saying that. It comes with doing it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I think you get comfortable after a while, But it is a style that I love, and I still watch all those guys. And I like all the other styles, too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of the crowd work comics, because that's really not my thing. And I love, Ian Bagg and Jeff Garcia and Bob Zaney and all the guys that do the crowd work. That always amazes me, because it's something I really can't do that well. And all the other styles too, the observational stuff, those guys and those men and women are really good at that. And that's not my style.
Right.
My style is kind of that old school Rodney style. And I hope I've gotten okay with that over the years. But I still have fun doing that.
Mm-hmm. And you're, I imagine you put a lot of that into your radio show at night.
Well,
that's your personality.
Yeah, I just love coming up with little quick quips, I guess, one-liner things out of the news. To me, that's the freshest.
Wait, KLOS.
95.5
Every
Sunday
Sunday
night,
night.
11 to 3. You're good with this, Eddie. I like that. You know how to plug. I think that that's the fun part for me, is doing stuff that's kind of fresh.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of the one thing I do take a little pride in, is being able to do stuff that's fresh.
I think
Some acts are really amazing, but and it's actually to their advantage. You could see them, 2 years from now, and I'm not saying they're doing the same material, but
Right.
just the same style and same thing. With me, if you see me 2 years later, I'm hopefully doing something from that week. Mm-hmm.
I think something that probably most of the public overlooks is that almost all comics have to have a certain amount of intelligence, because you're doing jokes about the news and stuff like that, and comics in general are fairly well read, because if you want your one-liners or whatever to be topical, you have to know what's going on.
Well, that's where I've had a problem, Eddie. I'm not that intelligent.
What? And the reading
it's
part,
really
right?
been tough. But
You can look at pictures. Some of these papers still have pictures.
Oh,
And
well,
kinda
can you?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
you
then
can
that
kinda
might
pick
help.
stuff up.
That probably would help me.
No, I've
But
always,
I know what you're saying. Comedians, I think, are pretty sharp by nature. They have to be. And although I think a lot of times they're thinking, if I'm so smart, why did I go into this business? Comedians are pretty smart people, mostly. And I think also you have to be well-read, because to make the jokes, you have to know what's going on with the story.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like I said, you have to be aware of the times.
Yeah.
And what's going on, and
I think that's my favorite part of it.
Yeah.
My favorite part of it is that. And I think I did get that from radio. Because in radio, especially morning radio, your whole job is to talk about whatever's going on in the news that day.
right.
And
Drive time.
Drive time radio. So you kind of have to be up on what's going on, and it forces you to pay attention.
What kind of guests do you have on your radio show at night?
Well, I try to mix it up. I have sports guests on. This last weekend, I had Vince Ferragamo, the old Ram quarterback,
great.
on, and I had Ron Say on from the Dodgers because everybody's talking about the stealing the signs.
The Penguin, yeah.
Yeah, the Penguin was talking about that. And then Vince Ferragamo was weighing in on that whole helmet incident that happened this week.
Right.
Where the guy hit the guy with the helmet. And
See, you're up with it.
yeah, I try to be. And then, I'll have rock stars and I'll have comedians on all the time and I'll have actors and actresses and, different types of people. Hey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. Do you ever have bartenders on?
No, Eddie, but we could make an exception there because you are the number one bartender. This really, I have to give you some props. You are the best bartender, and this is a legendary bar, and you've seen all the greats have come through here, and you just really keep everybody in a good mood and happy here.
Oh, thanks. It's a trip. I've been kind of privileged to have
good.
this job. It's the people, the comics that I've met.
Well, you love it too, don't you?
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I definitely do. I wouldn't be here this long.
Yeah, yeah.
40 years.
Is that how long?
Yep.
Oh, man.
40
You've seen all
years,
the biggies.
Everybody. You name them. And not only that, over the years, everybody has been in here. Every celebrity at one point or another. Either.
I remember there's a picture here of Carson at the bar.
Yes. Oh, God. I remember that night very well.
And
it's
he used to like his drinks, didn't he?
That was an evening at the Improv night.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
It was Doc Severinsen was hosting the show.
Oh, that's what it was.
So Johnny came in and he was sitting in the audience, and I've told this story before and I'll tell it now so that you can hear it. Bud is up on stage. And this is before the show starts. He's trying to warm up the crowd.
Right.
And he rolls off a couple of jokes, none of which seem to work. And he finally goes like, oh, just a little attempt at humor. And Carson yells out, very little. And it was just hilarious because most of the people didn't even know he was there until then. But then afterwards he came out and he was sitting over here, and the rest is just history. He was like, for me, he was just a nice guy. He was one of the 2 or 3 people I was in awe of meeting. Because you get jaded,
You've seen them all, you've met them all, but he was pretty special.
What other contacts have you had with Bud besides?
Just in general, I would hang out once in a while with him in Vegas or down in Palm Springs with he and Alex. And I remember one time, we were in Vegas at Harrah's, and they had a big press thing. And Bud kind of had me running interference. Because Bud has his fans, and they were bugging him during he goes, Frazier, keep those people away from me. Well, I'm trying to do my job.
Bud, just a minute. Keep them away from me.
Yeah, I thought that was supposed to be the other way around, Bud. But no, I just love the guy. And, what I really liked about him is that, Bud's a tough guy. He's an old school owner. He's not a pushover by any means, but he has a soft spot for the comics. And he would help you if you needed, like a lot of times during that era, I needed a gig. Mm-hmm. But always made sure I was covered, always.
Well, you mentioned tough guy. You know that he went up Pork Chop Hill.
Yeah, that's a tough guy. That's a tough guy.
And he came down.
Yes.
Unfortunately, not everybody did.
No, that's true. And God bless all of our service people.
Definitely.
But Bud is from that era. Mm-hmm. And yet, he had a soft spot for the comics. He wanted to make sure that you were doing okay in your world. And I'll always love him and respect him for that.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people that knew him don't, or know him, they don't realize that as gruff an exterior that he had, and get out of the hallway.
He's a sweetheart.
If you were in trouble,
he'd always be there for you.
Yeah, definitely, and he,
and he's fun too. Meal. He was a fun guy.
Yeah.
It got to the point where I knew him well enough to always tease him and stuff, and like if he was on stage, I'd be like heckling him and stuff down in, and we had fun in Fantasy Springs.
No, he still is, to me, an icon.
Oh yeah.
he is
sure.
responsible for the way the business is today.
Yeah.
It's not to say that there wouldn't be a business today, but he started the original club
and let's be
back
honest,
then.
yes, he did. He started
In
it
New York.
and he did. And not only that, his image today, his aura, still, I think, permeates the whole club.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I never come here without thinking about Bud. How's Bud? Love Bud. You know.
Well, anybody that's been involved in comedy for a while, you know who he is. You know, it's just like you
he's
know
legendary.
who Mitzi
And-
is and stuff like
and
that.
both of those people discovered a lot of people. Mitzi doesn't get enough credit either for having discovered a major amount of stars, big stars,
Oh yeah, they're
big stars, and so did Bud.
Mm-hmm.
They
No,
both
they-
discovered a lot of big stars.
Yeah, they don't get that kind of credit.
I know
At
your
all.
whole staff. You have they still have the best staff.
Oh yeah, our people are good.
Yeah.
As long as they do their jobs. God
Well,
damn it.
that's what I worry about,
It's
knowing those clowns.
how many different
Come on, man.
how many different radio stations have you been on here?
Well,
been them all.
I've been on a lot of. My old joke is if it's got a K in front of it, I've been fired from it. But I really, K Rock, KMET, both legendary. KLOS, legendary. KLSX, K Earth.
So I imagine your music knowledge is just immense, you know, with over the years. And who are your favorite groups performing?
Well, I've always been a big Van Halen fan. I helped Van Halen get started.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was, I think, the first person to ever play Van Halen. I think I was the first person to ever play Motley Crue
Wow.
on major radio. You know, a lot of the big bands I kind of helped get going. I do still like both those bands. I'm a big Stones fan, of course, and also The Who. I like The Who. I like the classic rock bands, but I
Yeah.
also like a lot of the. I kind of have a diverse. I like punk rock. I was there in the early days of punk rock at K Rock. Big Sex Pistols fan.
Mm-hmm.
I like Black Flag. I like a lot of those punk bands too.
Did you host shows at the Whiskey? Or
Yep,
the
I did all
Troubadour?
those. I hosted a lot of shows at Whiskey. I just worked with Oingo Boingo again recently, and I reminded them that I opened for them at the Saban Theater recently, and I reminded them that I opened for them when they had Danny Elfman as their lead singer back in '80 when they were starting out at the Whiskey. So I work with all those bands, coming up. A big Elvis Costello fan. I was there in the early days when the first people I met in L.A., music people, were my very first show. I met Tom Petty, Deborah Harry and Blondie,
Wow.
a couple of the Ramones, and the Sex Pistols, half the Sex Pistols. So that was like...
The Sex Pist.
Yeah, I met. They were there for Rodney Bingenheimer's show, and Rodney was on after me, on K Rock. So he said to me, "They're all going to be huge," and none of them had any product out. Even Tom Petty didn't have product.
Well, and do you feel? I don't know how do you feel knowing that you've kind of helped somebody's career go? Being the first to play Van Halen or Motley Crue or whatever, as a DJ, because you guys, in the music business, you guys are powerful, because you can put them out there.
Well, I think particularly back then, you had a little more control over that. You had a little more power because you could do that. Nowadays, everything's kind of scripted.
Yeah.
But then you had a little bit more wiggle room to do that, and yeah, you feel good about it. I think when you ever help anybody. I also feel I helped a lot of comics from that era come on my show first before they got big. Dice was a buddy, and I had Dice on way early before anybody else, and I had Kinnison on way early before anybody else, and
yeah.
And Tim, my old buddy Tim Allen, and all those guys, when people really didn't know who they were yet. Jim Carrey, and it was you feel good about it because I love all those guys. I love talent.
Yeah.
And it's great to see people get a shot.
It is, and it's got to be nice because they are nowhere at that point, and yet, like, even if they don't make it, you've given somebody, a moment that they can remember. And,
Well,
and
you
move
know,
on
and
from.
you could tell. I mean, it was like, wow, those guys are good. You know, you just go, okay, they're going to make it.
Well, the guys you mentioned, I mean, my
You
God.
could tell that they
Yeah.
were going to make it.
I mean-
But I remember with George Lopez, my boss, saying to me, "Why are you putting that guy on? Nobody knows him." And I go,
That's the
"Well,
idea.
they will." And about 2 years later, he was huge.
Yeah. Well, Kinnison,
Same thing.
yeah, and Kinnison was just a legitimate lunatic in a very nice way.
I love Sam, and I got to know him pretty good, and he was just great.
Yeah, he used to come in here all the time. I can't tell
Cool
you.
guy, though, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. He's
Yeah.
a great guy.
Nice
He was
guy.
a wonderful guy. I just had to take his keys all the time so that
Yeah,
he couldn't get
yeah.
back into his car.
You don't want him driving.
No, but he was the nicest guy in the world.
Great guy.
He really was,
Yeah.
and hilarious.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
he whenever he performed, people would flock down.
Well, I still remember the first time I saw him live and saw Dice live. And that was over at the Westwood Comedy Store, which is no longer
Right, in existence.
around. Yeah. It was over on Westwood Boulevard, and it was kind of an annex to the Comedy Store.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the up-and-comers would play there because it was hard to get into the main, to the Melrose, or to the Sunset
Sunset.
Room.
Mhm.
Same as it was hard to get in here.
Right.
So this was like where all the guys who were sort of starting to get their footing would go. And I remember the first night I ever went there, Bob Zaney brought me down there. He goes, "You're going to love this place." I get
Bob
down there,
Zaney.
and he goes, "Watch this guy." And it was Dice. And Dice was young and looked like Fonzie, like a real Fonzie. You know, he was thin, he had the leather jacket, he was lighting a cigarette for 5 minutes before he said anything. Just you're overwhelmed when you see him. You're like, wow.
Yeah, he's
and Kinnison was there. This was funny. We would have Kinnison chase the crowd. Like when it got to be 2 o'clock and we wanted to go home, Sam would get up there and just start screaming at the audience.
Get out.
Get out! Ah, ah. You know, the thing that made him famous later, right? And people would just be like, "Honey, get your purse. We're out of here." You know, they just clear the room, and then later that made him famous. That same style.
And I always have to say this about Dice Clay. I know him. I didn't know him. I don't know him well, but people don't understand that or a lot of people don't, that what he does, is a character.
Yeah,
It is not him by any stretch of the imagination.
No, he's not like that at all.
No, it's a character. He gets so much shit because of that, and yet it's like,
No,
hey,
if you knew him, he's a sweetheart.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
good dad. He's like a great dad. His kids are great, and he just is down to earth and a cool
right.
guy.
And a very good actor on top of
Oh,
that,
very
too.
good actor.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
Frazier, I want to thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, buddy.
I appreciate
Oh,
it.
thanks for the shirt. Thanks for the interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. Don't forget my water.